It's a privilege this morning to welcome Dr. Stevie Chepko. She is a vice president with CAEP. I almost said in CAEP, but she is.
It costs you $1.
She's been a teacher educator for over 30 years, and I know that we've circulated her bio, but a couple things I wanted to point out. That she has been involved in the best practices in the field, providing guidance on quality assessments. She's been a chair of the task force to revise initial physical education teacher standards. She has served as an NCATE reviewer and auditor, been a department chair for 12 years in addition to her 25 years of teaching career, served on dean's councils, been a scholar, published, made over 1,000 presentations, given keynotes at numerous conferences, and I appreciate the fact that her expertise specifically is in assessment and data literacy. That is something that we've been talking about and working on, and the time is right for that. She has a context in West Virginia. She may mention that, but she is in the West Virginia University Physical Education Hall of Fame and the Castleton College Athletic Hall of Fame. Dr. Chepko received her undergraduate degree from West Virginia University, attended the University of North Carolina at Greensboro for further graduate work, and completed her EDD at Temple University in curriculum and instruction and sport history. And we are so pleased to have Dr. Chepko here. She is a primary leader in CAEP, which has undergone transition or is new to us. We are transitioning also at the same time, thinking about our next visit and our preparation into the future with CAEP standards. And so this is timely to have this presentation today. Let's give Dr. Chepko a royal welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Since I'm in physical education, I usually can be heard anywhere. That is my background, especially these back row Baptists that we have in the back there. I was a back row Baptist, so I understand that behavior perfectly. The first 15 or 20 minutes, I'm just going to give you an overview of the new process. CAEP is significantly different than NCATE. The focus is different. How we're going to do things and how reviews are going to happen, there are significant differences. So that's going to be the first 20 minutes. After that, we're going to switch gears and we're going to look at assessment. And I'm going to give you some activities to do. The most important thing about any accreditation process is the conversations it starts. What is important is the conversations you have with each other about how you want your teacher, what you want your teacher educators to be able to do. And the most important measure of that is not what your teacher educators do, it's what they get their students to do. The impact on K-12 is what CAEP is focusing on. What can your students do? How can they engage? How can your candidates engage students in learning? And how can you measure that impact? So it's a different way of sort of input measures. We're looking at output measures. And I'm not talking about state licensure tests. That will be part of it. I'm really talking about in the classroom when you're doing observation, what are you looking at? How are you assessing that observation? So that will be the bulk of what I do today. If we have time, or they give me a little more time, I also would like to share with you some things about Standard 1, because most of you are in programs. And for Standard 1, almost all the program level data will be in Standard 1, and you have to disaggregate it by program, which is another major difference from before. It's not aggregated across the unit. It's now disaggregated. All the data is reported at the program level. So it's a little different. Okay, the CAEP mission, basically the mission, and I handed this out because we have to use the CAEP colors. And when we get to some of my slides, they're impossible to read because they fade into the green. So I handed this out for you all. Evidence-based. You're going to hear that all over and over again. I called NCATE the kitchen sink approach. Give us 170 attachments and reviewers, go find it. Here's your student teaching handbook. There's one paragraph on page 72. Good luck finding it. That will no longer happen. What you will do is submit evidence specific to each component. You will tag that evidence. So instead of sending in the whole student teaching handbook, you cut and paste the paragraph. You cite where that paragraph. You tag it to tell it what evidence is that provides for what component. Ames, our system will be able to, for a reviewer, say, I want all the evidence they have presented for 1.1. Boom, it comes up. Okay? So it will be you making the case. You'll have to have an evidence-based case that you make the argument that you have met each and every standard and you have addressed each of the components. Now, we'll get into a little later. There are some components required. All the standard 4 components are required. You have to address those and meet those. And for standard 5, you have to meet 3 and 4. Okay, 3 and 4 for standard 5. The rest of them have to be addressed. But the decision on whether you meet a standard is a holistic decision, except for 4, where you have to meet each component to meet 4. Okay? Otherwise, it's a holistic decision. Basically, the purpose of accreditation is really to assure teacher quality. Teachers have been under fire, extreme levels over the last 10 years. We're blamed for everything and anything. And we've got a much different kind of student population that we've had in the past. But we do need to up our game. We need to make sure the most highly qualified candidates enter schools, and the schools that need the most help are who we need to send quality candidates to. And there's ample evidence that that has been a weakness. The differences, I don't know why this flashes the day I did this. I still don't know why it flashes, but it does. Basically, accreditation, all providers. It's no different than TAC or NCAEP. Program review, TAC never did program review. TAC is the inquiry brief. There were 2 associations accrediting teacher ed programs. It was TAC and NCAEP. They joined and became CAEP. TAC never looked at program level data. CAEP always did in one form or other. Now everybody does. Specially licensed area review, again, TAC didn't do that. If you do SPA reports, that's what the special licensed area review is. Requires evidence of impact on K-12 learning in service as well as pre-service. That's a huge change. One of the things you're going to have to do is follow your candidates into the field. And we want the data from the field. I don't know if it's good news. The new federal regs are going to require that. At the state collect that data. So that will be very helpful, but you know how federal regs go. They're being talked about in Congress, so who knows what that will happen. But we are working with states to develop a data system. Kentucky has a pretty robust one in place already, so that you can get that information from the state. We've also worked with the National Board. National Board has worked with us, and you now, by spring, will be able to go to National Board, and you'll type in your institution, and we'll tell you every one of your graduates who have ever become nationally board in your subject area. It's really good data to take a look at where your students over time. So National Board's going to do that for us. And accreditation being data-driven, it's incredibly data-driven with the CAEP system. We're going to talk about the sequence of event and a couple of new things. The optional assessment review is brand new. We're going to talk a little about that. Self-studies and pathways. There are 3 different pathways that you can select. Formative off-site review, and then the on-site review. Basically, 3 years before your self-study is due, not your site visit, your self-study is due, you can submit your assessments for review by CAEP. You send them in. Of course, we have a template. You send them in. We have 3 reviewers read them, and they send you feedback using the CAEP criteria. And part of what we're going to do today on the second half on assessments is look at some of the submissions, and you're going to play CAEP reviewer using our rubric that we use to look at assessments. So you can do it. This is optional. You do not have to do this. What happens, you get feedback. Hopefully you take the feedback. You can tweak your instrument. You may get feedback, say, hey, your instruments are great. Just go ahead. You may get feedback, this needs some tweaking here or there. It becomes part of your review process. It is part of your record. When they get on site, they will look at, did you make these improvements, what you're doing with your assessment. What we found, we did a review of TAC and NCAEP submissions. What we found is we had a lot of data from really bad instruments. Bad data, bad instruments produce bad data, which means the data is not any good to make a decision on. So there's a real emphasis on looking at your assessments that you are using to provide evidence. And it was both systems. It was amazing. I saw one student teaching instrument that was just eight items, you know, in 1 to 5 circle number. Yeah, and you know, people were getting through with these instruments. So that is a real shift on occurrence. They didn't look at that. Basically, you'll get them back within 60 days after you submit them. There's the deadline. You are 2020, so you have the 3 years out. You'll get information. There's a deadline. It has to be submitted by such and such a time, and then you get it back in 60 days. The reviewers for these assessments, basically, we are now specialty reviewers. And if you want to become a reviewer, please, we have an OVA system, which is called Online Volunteer Application. You fill that out. We are looking for assessment and data specialists. So these reviewers are trained to look at assessments and data. And each one of these reviewers will be one member of the site visitor team. So every site visitor team will have a specialist in data and assessment on that site visitor to make sure. The other thing is we get huge conclusions from bad data. I had one the other day that somebody asked me to look at it. It said, we know we run a great program, and our evidence is our exit interviews, we had 33% of our kids returned our information sheet, and they had jobs. Therefore, we run a great program because they all had jobs. So what about the other 67%? Yeah. And you can't make that conclusion. That data may be helpful, but you can't make that conclusion. We see that all the time where we have big conclusions made from weak data, so you've really got to be careful with that. There'll be one on each team. It will work that all three of it review your assessments separately. Then there's a team meeting for a final team report, and you'll receive the team report. You don't have to submit your proprietary assessment. Like if you're doing EdTPA, that already has validity and reliability established, so you don't have to turn that in. That's on you fill out a little chart that says which proprietary, your state licensure test. You know, those we're going to accept because they're from an outside agent who has, Danielson is another one that could be used. So that, any of those kinds of things are proprietary, they belong to somebody else and you're using them. The other thing you have to submit is you have to submit with each of your assessments that you've created how you've established validity for those assessments and how you've established reliability. I'm not talking reporting a statistical coefficient. I'm talking about did you do criterion referenced or a construct or content validity? What method did you use to determine that your instrument is a valid measure of that whatever construct that you're looking at? So you have to report how you did it, and then we want to know how you established a rate of reliability. You know, how are you making sure that everybody's using that consistently in the same way and that you're getting reliable data? So both of those have to be turned in 3 years out, and you'll get feedback on that as well. The 3 pathways: selected improvement, transformative initiative, inquiry brief. Okay, you all did NCATE. That was the selected improvement pathway. That's what the NCATE traditional was. The difference this time, you had to do target. This time you have to look at your data, say, okay, we did really well in these areas, but this area is our lowest area. So we want you to select to improve your lowest area, not your best area. So part of your selected improvement has to be based on your data in your report. So you have to look at that and have a plan on how you're going to improve it. And each year in your annual report that the institution submits to NCATE, we have to have a progress report on your annual improvement plan. So that's part of selected. Transformative initiative, this is a research plan. And it may be something you all might want to do. The transformative initiative is you still meet the CAEP standards, but you have a research plan and you can do it with other institutions about a specific aspect of something in research that you would like to look at. Like if you want to increase student engagement, so how are you going to have strategies that teach your candidates to engage students more in the learning material? And you can do a research study on that. And you submit what is called a transfer initiative plan, TIP, and it lays out your research plan. That it gets approved by our research committee. And once it's approved, you put the plan, in fact, and you report on it each year. Inquiry brief is the old TAC system. Inquiry brief is slightly different. It is more research-based. In the inquiry brief system, you still address all the CAEP standards, but you make claims. So you decide what claims you want to make in relationship to the CAEP standards, and then you provide evidence that you're meeting that claim. So those are the three ways that we can do it. And all of them, there's equivalency across pathways. All of them have to meet the standards. They have more in common than they have differences. It's just you choose. Self-study, after you do the 3-year out review, and if you do SPA reports, you know they're 3-year out on the SPA reports. You produce a self-study. Basically, you have to address each component. For the self-study, you can have a weakness in a component and still meet the standard. Okay? But you must address them. You can't decide, I'm not going to address 2.1 or 3.4 or whatever. And the decision is made on preponderance of evidence. All components on Standard 4 must be met for Standard 4 to be met. So if you do fail a component under Standard 4, and that's the in-service data, then you cannot pass Standard 4. 5.3 and 5.4 must be met under Standard 5. That's your quality assurance system. That's basically how are you using your data, how are you making sure that all your candidates are qualified in all areas. Basically, each of them have specific. I am going to shoot to your deans a copy of the accreditation handbook. We just finished it. It's going out on Monday to all institutions. It's still a draft copy because it hasn't gone to the publisher to be all slicked up. So you're getting the working draft, but all the substantive information will remain the same. So you all have that in version 2.0 of the evidence guide that gives you information specific to the kinds of evidence we're looking for each and every standard on it. Basically, you submit the self-study, a written self-study. It comes to us. It's the formative feedback. We read your self-study. We send you a report based on the self-study. Then you have a chance to address any questions raised in the self-study in an addendum before the site visitor team shows up on campus. So these are the different ways the self-studies work. You notice the annual report is in there. You have to submit an annual report every year to the institution on the 8 measures. Plus, you have to address any areas of weaknesses from a previous report. In moving forward, your selective improvement plan will be addressed each year. We are giving institutions feedback on their annual report every year. They did not do it last year, but starting this year, you will get written feedback on your annual report from CAEP so that we can make sure the plans are being chased. On-site, visitor team comes on-site. They pursue evidence trails. The big change here is usually the visitor team would say, yes, you've met a standard, or no, you haven't met a standard component. That will not happen. What will happen with the visitor team is they analyze the evidence. They will make comments on the evidence, like there seems to be strong evidence for this, there's weaker evidence for this. They do not make a decision on whether the standards are met. That is not their role. So that is an enormous change from in the past. Before, they would give you that information, but the actual decision was at the commission level. Now they will not be providing that information. They provide an analysis. We have a huge cultural shift to do with our reviewers. They write great summaries about what they see, but they often have not done an analysis. They will switch to more of an analysis and looking at the data very specifically. They will not be making a decision about whether the standard is met. So the visitor team pursues, and what they do is confirm. Remember I said that you would just take the paragraph from the student handbook that pertained to the section? When they get on site, student teaching handbook will be available. They'll confirm that that information is there. They may want to look at something else in your handbook, but that's what they're going to be doing. They're going to be confirming and verifying the evidence on that. And as always, there'll be questions. They'll be meeting with your mentor teachers and your principals, the same kind of sequence that's happened in the past. The accreditation decision. Now, this has changed. Basically, the self-study, the addendum, all the information from the team, the visitor team, is provided. What happens is it goes to a panel on each commission. Each of the SI, TI, and IB all have their own separate commissions. Okay? And what happens is they put a panel that's usually 5 people. They review everything that comes from the visitor team, and then they're the ones who make a decision on whether the standards are met. So that middle review process is 3 to 5 commissioners. The lead reviewer, they each have a lead reviewer, and that person is most familiar with your case. They present it to the other panel members. Out of this, a recommendation comes. That once they make a recommendation, it goes to a joint commission, which is, that panel is members of the TI, SI, and IB. We want to make sure there's consistency across all 3 pathways. They look at the recommendation from the panel, and then they make a recommendation to the entire accreditation commission, and the commission is actually the one who votes on the final decision. So it's actually 3 levels of review of the program. So the joint committee is the one that makes the final recommendation to the accreditation council, and it's really to ensure that the equivalency across those pathways are held. Okay? So that's, and then you have the decisions: full, conditional, probationary, and denial, revocation. Okay? Those are all. After decisions made, and this is federal guidelines, you have to public announcements of the results. Your annual report data must be up on your website too. We're about to do random checks to see if people have put up their annual report data as the Fed say. And you have to inform others. Certificates and letters are sent. You know immediately about your decision because we send an email out the last day of the Accreditation Commission. Email goes out to all institutions saying yay, nay, whatever it is. Then you get a follow-up letter with certificate. You have 30 days to appeal any decision that was made. And there's an appeal process that goes on. Cross-cutting themes, you have to address 2 cross-cutting themes: diversity and technology. Remember, years ago we said technology used to be a standard. Technology is a tool of teaching, not a standard for teaching, so we've moved a long way in that. Diversity is woven throughout many standards. I will tell you that if you address the components specific to diversity and technology, you will meet the cross-cutting themes. And there are, for Standard 1, diversity has to be emphasized in Standard 1, Standard 2, and 3. So all of those have components specific. Anytime you see all students, we're really talking about demonstrating to us how you are working with a diverse population. In technology, the same thing. Standard 1, 2, and 3, there are components specific to technology in those standards. So you must address those, and then you will meet the cross-cutting themes. There are 3, you must review your program level data. Are you all going to, well, I don't know, you all could do SPAs. I think you've done SPAs in the past. No? Okay. The SPA option is 3 years before you submit. You can submit your evidence for meeting the national standards for your professional association, like NCTM, the National Math Standards. You can choose to do that. If you meet them, then you will be recognized by the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, and you'll get a logo to go on your website. That is one way you can do program, and you can do a combination of these 3 options. This depends on your state agreement. We try to sign with each state. For instance, Indiana's just signed. They only allow SPA options. They make everybody do SPA in Indiana. Ohio allows all 3. Okay, now Ohio wants out of the program review, so if you do select the state review option in Ohio, it costs you $5,000 per program. Yeah, per program. They're trying to discourage people from doing that. So the second, so that's the SPA option. 3 years out, you do a separate report. This requires a separate report, and you address their national standards, and they review the data. CAEP does not review it, the SPA reviews it. Feedback option. The feedback option is simply related to your self-study. For Standard 1, you have to disaggregate all your data by program area. So you don't report your praxis scores aggregated over all programs. You report it by program. And I've got a sample of that on if we get to my slides on Standard 1. But you have to do it by program area. So every piece of data you submit for Standard 1, you disaggregate by each and every program in your program. Now, if you have a small enrollment, like you only have graduate 5 people over 3 years, you get to aggregate that. You don't have to report that per year. You just report it in the third year because you have a low end. All right, so there's some data things you have to look at. But you have to do that. That's the feedback option. The state of Tennessee, if they elect this, gives us their state standards, and you have to address their state standards along with the CAEP standards. And so there's a way to do that you just mark which state standards it goes to. They also can give us anything that they want us to look at for them. For instance, Ohio has, they have to prepare their students with an anti-bullying program. So they have to document that has been done in their program. So the state of Tennessee can give us what they want us to check. And then at the end, you get certain questions specific to your program area data. It will say, we noticed that some of your programs are low in assessment. They're scoring lower than some of your other programs. How do you address that? So there'll be questions triggered specific to your program level data that you will answer. And the states will provide those questions for us. So every state will have their own shell. I won't tell you how happy this made my tech guy. Each state has their own shell. And you'll have a drop-down menu, and you'll say, we're going to do SPA and feedback. We're just doing feedback option. It will tell us which one of those options. And of course, the third is the state review. If your state reviews your programs, then all that does is let us access the state report. So that becomes part of it. 8 annual measures. You do that every year. Many at the program level probably don't know about this because I'm sure it's handled at the unit level. But impact measures, outcome measures, graduation, licensure rate, employment rate, and consumer information. The consumer information right now is the defaulting on federal loans. Okay. Progress on stipulation or weaknesses you have to report through your annual report. Pathway-specific progress update, you're going to have, if you do SI, then you're going to have to do a yearly update on the SI, TI, and IB. So that will be part of the annual report every year. And annual reports they're up now, and they're due by April 7th, I believe, is the deadline for that. So you have 3 or 4 months to get your annual reports in. Any question? That's a quick overview of the process. Now, that's why you'll have a drop-down menu, and it will say SPA and program review and feedback. So if you have a program that really wants to achieve their national recognition, and we do have very nice logos now to go up on the website, then they can do that. So they can do it, as long as your state allows it. Problem is that the state doesn't allow it, we can't. You can still do it, but it will be extra work and won't count towards accreditation. So it's whatever your state agreement says. But yeah, and many programs elect to do that. We'll have some programs that only have one SPA, nationally recognized program, because that program wanted the national recognition from their institution. So any combination, as long as it's on the state agreement, we'll let it happen. Okay, this is on quality assessments, because this is the huge change. We know this is a huge lift. We have people that are before the 3-year out review that are already submitting their assessments. We've already started this process. Basically, what CAEP is going to require is for each of your assessments, you're going to have a rubric per item. So for each item on whatever assessment you're using, you're going to have to define the criteria that you're using at each of the levels. It's really a tool. And the reason that's important is you need to provide specific feedback to your candidates. And when you use a rating scale and it says meets expectations, and you have not told me what that expectation is, then you have provided no feedback to me. And it calls into question the validity of the instrument, and it calls into question the reliability of the instrument. So it's really a tool that we're looking to make sure programs have defined the criteria that is related to their mission and what they're looking for, and they've had those conversations. So you have to address meaningful and relevant attributes. You have to align the item with the CAEP standard. Okay? In standard 1.1, the component 1.1 under standard 1 is related to in-task. So some of my examples are going to be from that. Consistent categories are developed that really define what you're looking for, that it's congruent with the complexity, cognitive demands, and skill requirements of the standard. Okay? You can't add, if the standard asks for application and you have students identifying, that's not the same level. Okay? So really think about Bloom's upper levels of taxonomy, because that's where standards are written on that. In the effort or challenge that's required on each level. Basically, it should provide evidence directly linked to the standards. One of the first things the reviewers are going to do is say, does this provide partial evidence for the standards? You're not going to have an item that provides full evidence for a standard. It's impossible. Have you read our standards? They're like whole paragraphs. There are so many things in the standard that you're not going to have one item. It's going to take multiple items to measure the standards, and we're going to talk about how to do that. Whatever you're measuring should be intentional and purposeful. It's something you want to know about and how well your candidates do it. And these are where these conversations are really important. You look for key verbs, because that's just huge. You've got to relate it back to the verb that's in the standard. You look for the content or action that's required by the standard. And you have to identify the intent of the standard. What is the standard really trying to get at? And it will take multiple items and sometimes over more than one assessment to provide full evidence for making the standard. We are always looking for multiple data points. So if you give us just one thing, like if you say our content knowledge is covered because we take Praxis 2 in the content area, that's one data point. So we want to see, and that tells you their knowledge. It doesn't tell you a thing about can they apply that knowledge for learning experiences. So think about multiple data points as you go forward on this. Okay, this is standard 1. We're going to look at standard 1, the very first one. As you can tell, there's a bunch of stuff in standard 1. The first component is candidates demonstrate an understanding of the 10 INTAS standards at the appropriate progression level. INTAS has different levels, like for an experience, they have one for a beginning teacher, mid-career, and advanced. We were looking at beginning teacher level at that level. You do not, let me repeat this because I will be misquoted, you do not have to address all 10 INTAS standards. You have to address the 4 categories. INTAS has categories. The first 2 standards are related to the learner and learning. They have 2 standards on content, instructional practice, and professional responsibility. So you have to address those 4 categories. There's not a program in the world that doesn't address those in some way. But INTAS has a very good document on their model score that give you criteria for each of their standards. They're great as you begin to develop rubrics because it will give you some ideas of what they're thinking about as criteria for first-year teachers. Okay, so I took INTAS Standard 3B. The teacher develops, and develops is that key verb, learning experiences that engage learners, requiring student engagement, and that's a very different animal. And collaborative and self-directed learning. So what's the content? Collaborative and self-directed learning that extend learners' interaction with ideas and people locally and globally. Wow, that's a lot of stuff. So there's no way you're going to write one item that's going to address all that. So what you have to do is disaggregate from there. And what part can you do? What part can you break out so that you can measure three different items might measure that across the board. So the one I did develops learning experiences that engage, because I'm interested in student engagement, in collaborative learning requiring communication skills. That's what I'm going to look at. Collaborative learning and communication. I'm going to separate that out from my item. Okay? So what behaviors or characteristics of a learning experience would you look for as an acceptable level performance of a candidate that demonstrates engaging students in a learning experience? We throw out terms, problem solving, critical thinking. We never define them for the kids. If you don't define what student engagement means, they'll do it one time and not do it the other because it's absolutely random. You need to define what you mean by student engagement. So, my first activity sheet that, Kath, can you pass these out for me? Is I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and I want you, this is worksheets we're going to be working on, to talk to each other and give me 5 characteristics of student engagement. 5 things that you could teach your student about designing a learning experience that will engage students in whatever content your area you're in. Okay, talk to each other. You got 5 minutes. What characterizes learning experiences that are going to engage students? Students always refers to P12. And NCATE speak, or see, now I owe them $1 again. Anytime we say NCATE or TAC, we have to pay $1. In CAEP speak, student always is K-12 or P12, and candidate is always your teacher candidates. Okay, so that's how we differentiate. Okay, I'll show you my list. Hence why you didn't get the PowerPoint ahead, because I know you all would have cheated. All right. Candidates provide specific instruction for completing the task. Characteristics of tasks that engage students are that there's an outcome and there are clear directions. If they don't provide clear directions, it's just sort of general, it's less likely to engage the students. And you're going to get this PowerPoint, so do not write it down. I just didn't give it to you. I'm going to send it to everybody. Accountability built into the task. One of the mistakes we make that tend not to engage students, we don't hold them accountable for the task. I used to, in one of my many misspent youth, I substitute taught between jobs, and they loved me because I would go into English and they would say, read this short story or something. Well, you're substitute teaching in high school. The chances of them actually reading that story are slim and none because they're going to chit-chat, nobody's going to hold them accountable. So I walked in, I said, the teacher left me a quiz. At the end of reading the story, you have to take the quiz, 5 questions. And they went, oh, crap. So they all sat down and read the story. I wrote the quiz. The teacher hadn't left the quiz. I wrote it because I didn't want to be driven all crazy all day. And guess what? They read the story. They did well on the quiz. And when the teacher came in, she had quiz graded by me. And you keep them so on task. Accountability. And so part of what student engagement is there accountability? If it's a general discussion where they don't have to produce something at the end, then they're less likely to be engaged in it. Task is interactive is really important, that it requires some conversation or interactive in some way. We also have to have a culture of explanation. It's not any good to give me the answer. You need to be able to justify the answer or explain your answer. And this is really true in math. That's one of the big changes they're trying to make in math. You know, giving a kid a worksheet, they might work out the answer, but they have no idea how it really works, and they haven't thought about how they got that answer. So explanation of that answer leads to higher student engagement. Reflecting, questioning, evaluating, all of those will more likely engage students. Student choice is huge. When you give them an activity, if your candidates for fair learning experience, if they give them 3 things, you can do one of these 3 with this project. And they're in groups or they're working individually. Student choice is huge. They have ample amount of research to say if you give students choices within the classroom, they're more likely to engage. Whether it's choosing who they work with, choosing one of 3 ways, even choosing how they're going to present their answer. One year at Winthrop, I taught a writing class on Who Are We that required a freshman. And I had a late afternoon one, 3 o'clock. I had every art major. Now, if you've ever dealt with art majors, first of all, they never get up till noon. They're up all night, you know, at the art studio. They're into it. And what I found, and what they taught me, was deadlines weren't all that important because they did not live on any deadline. And I'm trying to get them to turn in draft. It just wasn't happening. And so I finally just said, let it go. Get it to me when you get it to me. And it was amazing because it was really creative. It was some of the best stuff. But I had to change who I was, who tend to be very analytical. That's not who they were. And so part of what you have to do is say, where is that? Where is that culture? How are you doing with that approach? Questioning strategies, deeper questioning strategies work. These are just a few. What I would say to you is you need to define what student engagement means at Lincoln. Across the ed programs, when you talk about engagement, every candidate in every program knows what you mean. That these are criteria, they know this criteria. So when you go watch a student teacher and you've looked at their lesson plan and they say they're engaging students in this learning experience, are there some of these characteristics evident? Because if they're not, they're very unlikely to be engaged. And there's a boatload. You type in student engagement, you'll be buried in research on it. But we also know student engagement drives learning. The evidence is absolutely clear. The more we engage candidates in project-based learning, the higher the learning goes and understanding goes. So it's an important construct that we need to get at in programs, and we need to measure it in meaningful ways. And there are lots of others. So if I was writing a rubric and I was looking at student engagement, part of what I have to do is define that criteria so that my students know what I'm looking for. If I don't define it, they don't know. So we really need to let them know what we're looking for. So if we look at a rubric, it has to be appropriate, so it has to be aligned and evidence-based, definable, clear, agreed-upon meetings. That big part is agreed upon meetings. Observable, quality of performance can be perceived in some way. Distinct from one another. And we're going to look at some samples of not so distinct from one another levels and rubrics. And complete. All criteria together describes the whole learning, the whole meaning of the outcome. One of the rules of rubrics that roundly ignored is if you don't meet one criteria, you scored one down. Okay? If you put it in the rubric, you put the criteria there, they're supposed to meet all the criteria at that level, okay, to score at that level. So what performance at each level looks like on a specific item. So whatever item is in, what does that performance look like? There are 3 ways to do it. Qualitatively, you change the quality of what they're doing. Additive, you add one more thing. And then combination. Most rubrics that I write are combinations. Sometimes I'll add, it depends on what the item is and what I think makes sense. Sometimes I'll add, often I do just a qualitative change. If I do a qualitative change, I don't do it with vague terms. Okay, if I'm going to change the quality of what they're doing, I'm going to be very specific about what I mean about that quality. And what we do is, and CAEP is guilty. If you look at their standard, a deep understanding. What does that mean? I mean, I work for them and I don't know what it means. Yeah? What is a deep understanding? Yeah. And then the next level is not so deep understanding. You know, those aren't really measurable or observable. So think about that. And the big thing is, this drives me nuts. The lowest level should not be defined as the absence of the behavior. The candidate fails to. The candidate did not. The candidate, they did something. They may have not done what you want, but they did something. So think about what you usually see when they really screw it up. Yeah, and it will give you an idea of what should be there. You avoid evaluative terms like excellent, good, fair, poor. First of all, they're hard to define, vague. Secondly, it makes a judgment. Okay? So really try to avoid those if you can. Counting. Consistent. I had one I read the other day. One level was consistently. The next level up was regularly. Yeah. What's the difference between consistently and regularly? I had no idea. I mean, that was the only difference. You know, and not so consistently and not so regularly. I mean, you know, those are counts. Also, what I would say is, even in your item, try to be specific on what you're looking at. Candidate selection of teaching strategies that align with the intent of the lesson. Engage students through a series of interactive experience. And allow student choice with the lesson on how mastery of learning objectives are demonstrated. Okay? That's an item. So does that pretty much tell that student what I want? And I would tell you that one thing I think you should look at is focused teaching experiences during clinical classes. That we do too much looking at the whole class. When you watch a student for a beginning teacher for an hour, can you find 90 million things they did wrong? Yeah, I mean, they make mistakes. With a focused teaching experience, you say you've got 15 minutes. I want to see a learning experience that engages a student that does these things. And they have to produce that lesson, teach that lesson, film in. So you're looking at a 15-minute clip, and they're looking at a 15-minute clip. They've got the criteria. It will transform how they think. Because they think it's easy, and they often think they have learning experience engagement, and then they actually do it, and what happens? They aren't engaged. It's not. But now they know. So instead of doing an hour or random, focus what you want. What the research is also telling us is that we don't give them enough practice at the new strategies. We show them to them, We say practice with your peer. They go into a clinical experience. They never get a chance to practice it. They never practice it, so are they going to use it? They're not going to use it. So if you want to change how they approach teaching, they need to be able to practice it multiple times. So it's like breathing. Okay, I got this one. I know how to do it. So think about it in those terms. Narrow descriptions that allows for only one answer should be avoided. Pronouns, verbs should be simple and active, and they should be looked for. Indicators or pointers define quality, and you focus on the key, like engagement's important in that criteria, so that's the focus. Okay, use the criteria above to find an acceptable level of performance. If you flip over your sheet, you've got a beginning of a rubric. So define the acceptable level of performance that would demonstrate student engagement. Okay? You can use your list that you've prepared. So think about how you would write a rubric item that would define that. You would place on the meets expectation level. Minimally, they meet. When I do rubrics, I always start with meets expectation. Then I step up and step down from there. The other thing I want to tell you is, if you use a 3-level rubric, people migrate to the middle. If you do a 5-level rubric, people migrate to the middle. The research tells us that people tend to mark the middle. So what we would recommend is you use 4, because 4 forces a decision. Right? Now, we will take 3-level and we'll take 5, but I'm telling you that the research on that says that 4 tends to force reviewers to really make that, to discriminate between those levels. All right, I'm going to give you 5 more minutes. Talk to each other, and can you begin to write a rubric item that might define student engagement, okay? 5 minutes. Talk to your partners. It's always better collaborative. So, I'm going to show you some examples of what I did with it. Not the greatest, not the, they're somewhere in the middle, but I'll give you an idea. Do you see how difficult it is to write good? I mean, this is a hard task. It's going to take time, and I'm telling you right now that until you use it a couple of times, it will continue to change. Because what will happen is you'll see a behavior that you hadn't anticipated, that you'll see 3 or 4 times, so you add that to one of the levels. You always have to test drive them and use them. And actually, I'm going to give you the rubric we use. I test drove the first version of it last week at Eastern Shore University, and it was too dense, too hard to use, so you got the second iteration. There will be probably a 3rd or 4th before I'm finished with it. So don't be impatient with yourself. It takes time and it takes conversation. Okay, I'll show you what I did with it. Okay, this is remember I talked about tagging? On your instrument, whatever it is, tag the CAEP. This is for 1.1 in task 3B, and you don't have to put B, you just would put standard 3. You don't have to go that low. And then if it's program review with feedback, you have to put what state standard this might provide. So what I did, my item was candidates engage students in learning tasks requiring communication and collaboration. So I've got engagement, I've got communication and collaboration. So my meets expectation or acceptable level. Candidates use a range of questioning strategies to facilitate and guide students through the application of knowledge. Is facilitating a lesson much different than lecturing? So facilitate and guide are very different terms than just lecture. Implement problem-based learning tasks with a partner or a small group, so they have to work with one other person. Allow students to select ways of demonstrating content mastery. That goes back to my student choice. And require students to articulate solutions, that explanation point. Okay? So that would be what I would say at the acceptable level for that particular STEM, that those students would know that's what I'm looking for at the acceptable. When they plan their learning experience, and when I go see them, I want to see if this works for them. Okay? I step up. I always step up next. So stepping up, this is my first one. Candidates use a range of question strategies to facilitate and guide students. That's the same. Apply. Learning tasks with a partner or a small group. Allow students to select a way of demonstrating and require students to articulate solution. And when I stepped up, what did I say? Justify their answer verbally or in writing. So I qualitatively stepped up. It meets expectation if they can explain that answer. but can they justify that answer a different level of blooms? And so qualitatively, I step that up. Okay, next level, we're going down. And notice my headings. Meets expectations, exceeds expectations. I actually got one the other day. It had exceeds expectations, then has redefines as beyond exceeds expectation. Some days I think we just have not too much time on our hands. Developing. Candidates use a limited range of questions. Anytime you have a frequency count, like limited, you need to define it. So how have I defined it? 1 or 2. Okay? So always put that in there. Otherwise, what does that mean? To guide students, we already did that, with individuals, so they're not doing any kind of group work, that allow one solution, yeah, and students solve problems, do not articulate their answers. So they may solve it, but they don't articulate their answer in any way. So they're probably giving them a worksheet of some kind to do. Lowest level should always not be, we already talked about, defined by not what they don't do. Candidate does not use a range of questions, fails to facilitate and guide, fails to use problem-based learning, and students are not required to articulate their answers. So I have defined the lowest level and what the student has not done. I would rather define about what they probably have done in place of that. So at the lowest level, which is emerging, candidates' questions rely on simple yes or no answers. That most likely happen? Or candidate does not allow time for the students to answer. How many times do you see a beginning teacher go, ask a hard, challenging question, they can't stand the silence, so they give them the answer, all right? Learning experiences are passive, with candidates lecturing to students. Students complete worksheet in isolation. Students simply report their answers on the worksheet. So instead of saying what they failed to do, I put what they probably have done. There's a range of behaviors that you probably will see at that level. So it's just a different way of looking at it. And it doesn't level, when you circle 1, it doesn't label them loser. Do all those things you failed to do. It really says you did something, but it wasn't, it's emerging, you're not there yet. We need to move up to the next level on that. Okay, any questions about, and this is not easy to do. I mean, I'll tell you, it takes time, it takes lots of conversation and lots of effort. Okay, that's what it looks like at the end, across. Somebody said, well, would you give them these big, thick, what I always did was there was a scoring sheet that I just recorded 3, 4, whatever number it was. But when we went over it, they had the rubric next to them. So especially for the ones I circled 2 or 1, that we had a common language we were using as we discussed it. Checklists are not rubrics. Okay? Checklists are not rubrics. Checklists are very good if you want to clarify the assignment. We see this all the time with portfolios. People will submit a student portfolio. 5 lesson plans, check. 5 reflection, check. Doesn't tell me anything about the quality or what you had students do. We don't take them at all, okay? Now, it is useful to see if they followed instructions, and it's for a good peer check. You know, it's also good for constructs that are hard, like is dressed appropriately. Do not write a rubric on is dressed appropriately. You know, it's like being a little bit pregnant, you know. It's pretty much they are or they aren't, all right? So there are some things that checklists make sense about. You know, is prepared to teach every day. To me, that's a yes or no. And I don't want a rubric that says 80% of the time they're prepared. They better be prepared to teach every day. They may screw up, but they better be prepared every day. So those unit plans includes goals. Some of these work all right if it's a yes or no answer. And this is the portfolio that I already gave you. Rating scales. Rating scales, mask as rubrics. Rating scales is where you have a generic definition for each of your terms, and you circle number 1 to 5 usually, okay? And a lot of times they're frequency count. How many times do you see always, frequently, sometimes never, consistently, often, sometimes? Yeah, they're often frequency counts. The problem with them, it doesn't really, counting behavior doesn't, the classic example is, I saw one that we were actually using in my institution. It said, provides feedback, consistently provides feedback. Well, good job, way to go. That's feedback. Not the feedback I want them given. But if you're using a frequency count without a qualifier, all you're going to get is the frequency. Okay, and they can do things badly, but frequently. Quality ratings, lists of judgment. excellent, good, fair. The big problem with this is really not helpful to learners. You haven't told them specifically how they earn, other than say meets expectation. And what you get is a generic definition. The candidate has demonstrated the expectations for the item. Well, that really is helpful on it, all right? Questions to be answered, criteria for providing assessment. Now, what I'm going to hand out now is our rubric for assessments. And please take one, and I'm going to hand you out our first assessment, and you're going to play reviewers. Using the assessment rubric, tell me how you would score this sample I just gave you. Where would it score? What is this? Is this a rubric or is it a rating scale? It is a rating scale. And the problem with the rating scale is the validity is completely in question because you have not defined anything about the item other than choose a number. You're using a generic definition that holds for not related to the item at all. So once you determine it's a rating scale, it's a 1 on that scoring guide all the way through. Yeah, absolutely 1 all the way through. Because in this will kill you with validity. Because it's just not a valid instrument because you have not given us any criteria to make a decision. Not only is it not valid, but it's not reliable. Because if all of us are using this and we're watching the same teacher, we could score it very differently because we don't know how any of this is being defined. And we've been turning these in for a lot of years. If you don't define specifically what you're looking for each of those items, the reliability doesn't exist because you as a reviewer are determining what you're looking for. He's determining what he's looking for. She's determining what she's looking for. And furthermore, have you defined what the candidate really has done to get a 3 or a 1 or a 2? You may talk to them. If you do, somebody said, but on the back you get the right things. All right? This will really, and we're going to talk about how to establish construct validity. What happens is if you're using something like this, you can't establish any construct validity. And you have to establish validity for this instrument. You can't establish validity for this instrument. Can't be done. Maybe some reliability, but even that would be probably pretty shaky. And what happens, it will vary so much from rater to rater. I mean, we all bring our own biases in, and so you haven't defined it for the rater, you haven't defined it for the candidate, you haven't defined it for anybody. And the criteria has to be for the item that you use it. It's got to be per item, and specific to that item. If you do that, and we're going to talk about construct validity. All right, so that's why I left validity and reliability. That's the huge issue with that. Distinct level of candidate performance has to be defined. So there is no distinct level of candidate performance. You're using a generic definition. And it never changes. It's just the same thing across the board. Levels, do they represent a developmental sequence? Not really, because you haven't defined the levels. And is it clear which level represents excellent proficiency? Distinguishable from one to the other? No. I mean, all of these are no, 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 no with that instrument. Okay, we just did that. All right, here I'm going to give you a second one. This is a second one. It's a little different. I want to see you using that rubric now that you are in the advanced group with the rubric. Take a look at this. I'm going to give you another 4 or 5 minutes and take a look since you're now advanced. You've done this once. All right. Okay, where'd you score this one? How many had it at 1? How many had it at 2? It is a 1. It may look like a rubric. It may quack like a rubric, but it's a rating scale. Did the definition change? Yeah, the definition is exactly the same. They made it look like a rubric, but the definition is exactly the same across each of those levels. It doesn't have criteria other than say, look at the thing above, and it's a rating scale. So they made it look like a rubric, but it's still a 1. It is a rating scale. The definitions are absolutely the same. There's no specific criteria identified for that item, what for the student whatsoever, except how much support they got, which doesn't measure the item, it measures the amount of support they got, which is a different construct on it. So you can be fooled by something that looks like it's one thing. Now, I know you all had it at 2 or 3. You knew that even at 2, it was a terrible 2. But it's really, when the definition doesn't change across, no matter what the item is, it's basically a rating scale. That's what it is, because it's not providing any specific. Okay, last one. Now, I took that was for a reflection. It had 4 categories on reflection. I'm now going to have you review one that uses those same 4 categories, but changes it somewhat, okay? In Truth in Lending, I wrote this about 10 years ago, so this one's mine. So it's 10 years old, though. Yeah, no, it's 10 years old. Okay, so who had it at level 1? Okay, it's not a rating scale, so we know it's not a rating scale. Who had it at 2? Yeah, 2. Who had it at 3? Yeah, it's a tweener. It's not a 3, because why isn't it a 3? It can't be at 3. And where's the problem with it? Is there a lot of sort of vague terms, in-depth? They do try to define what in-depth before, so it's a tweener. It's not really a 3. It's squarely a 2. Remember, if it doesn't meet everything for 3, what does it have to be scored at? 2. Yeah. So it's a 2. It's a tweener because it still has the vague language. It's where we were 10 years ago. This first one you looked at, I just took the categories for reflection and made it a rating scale using language that had been submitted for actually a student teaching form. That thing you saw and that was actually submitted for a student teaching form for 56 items. With that generic thing. So you have sort of an idea of what to look for now and how to use it. I would say even when you work with your candidates, they have to create assessments. Part of what they need to do is know what makes a quality assessment. And the best way we can do that is model that behavior. Look at the quality of our assessments and what we need to do. All right, I'm over time already. Why rubrics? This is going to go back to establishing validity, okay? Students need to know, the candidates need to know the criteria you're using to judge them. So you need to spell that out. They provide specific corrective feedback based on, even if they've done it right, it tells them what they've done right. Students have no way of knowing. Reviewers need guidance on expectation at each level. So part of what you're doing is that reliability piece, because if I spelled it out, then you're going to get more consistent answers. Evidence on, this is content-related evidence. This is establishing content validity. Remember, for any instrument you turn in, you have to tell us how you establish validity for that instrument. Evidence to the extent in which a student's response to a given assessment, it reflects students' knowledge of the content area. So content validity goes back to, does it measure what you said it's measure and related to the content? Concern with the extent which the assessment provides that information. So if you have them identifying, they're supposed to be applying, it's not the extent. Quality rubrics help establish content validity. What you can do with your rubrics is you can look at other observation instruments. Danielson, there's somebody with M that does one. You might look at those and say, are we measuring the same kind of constructs? So have you identified those key elements? It will help you establish construct validity. Content related. Oh, and I took off the construct. Construct validity is when you've defined the criteria within it, and by having a quality rubric, you can identify it as construct validity. That you have identified the known criteria for that item. And you can, at the end, when you talk, how did you establish validity for instrument? We did it through construct validity. We tested our rubrics. We've established criteria for each of the stems. And we've looked at somebody else's to make sure we have identified the key elements. So you can use construct and content by using the instruments you're creating for Standard 1. Now, you only turn in the unit-wide assessments. And I would say about this on the graduate program, probably the internship evaluations we get on graduate programs are some of the worst we get about just being rating scales and really vague language. So the other thing we'll be looking at the advanced level of all programs is the quality of those instruments they're using to that the reviewers are using, because many of them are distant sites. That's quite common at the advanced level. But if you don't define it and it's a rating scale or the language is so that it's not going to give you good data. Okay, this is a list of resources on rubrics. The one I would tell you that's the most straightforward and most helpful is this bottom one. It's all $25 and probably on Amazon you can get it for $5 used. But it's a very good, straightforward, and why you do it and why it's important to do it on that. I can show you an observation instrument that's pretty good with rubrics for each one. I can just throw it up on the screen. I didn't bring a copy of it. I normally do this in 3 hours. You got it in like an hour and 15 minutes. So you're advanced group. I can tell that you exceeded expectations. Maybe you redefined it. I don't know. So if you want to see it, I'll throw it up. Any questions about anything this morning? No? Well, I'm going to shut up and let's go to the bathroom and get a break. I think we're time for a break. What do you think? Thank you all for having me. In the short term, I'll throw it up and take a look at it.